Pretty much every single year, we tend to hear about the Lakers going after a specific trade target or targets, oftentimes a big name trade target, whether it's a guy like Walker Kessler, Miles Turner, Jeremy Grant, names they have been linked to in the past and recent years in the past, or this season with a guy like Andrew Wiggins. That's been the hot trade target and really the name that they have been linked to, dating all the way back to the summertime. Or lately a guy like Herb Jones, a 3-and-D wing from the New Orleans Pelicans. Definitely names that make sense, but might they be more smoke rather than actual truth? Are they the guys that they're actually most heavily pursuing? Are they the names that they actually want, or do they actually want us to think that, and instead are going after a player that's not been heavily linked to them, at least not in regard to trade rumors and current trade reports? Maybe going after a team that they have a good relationship with and trying to trade for a player that's not been linked to them yet, or maybe going after a player that they have been lightly linked to, maybe not this season, but maybe in other years past. I think that might be the more likely route for them to take. After all, they love to work in the shadows. We've seen it with the Luka Doncic trade. Nobody saw that coming, and that probably will never happen again. A superstar being traded and nobody finding out about it until the reports actually come out. Or even for a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith, for example. Trading for him last December, pretty much nobody hearing about it, and even prior to them making a trade for him, very rarely was talked about by Lakers reporters or NBA reporters in general, was only very lightly linked to their team. So in my opinion, I guarantee they'll try and do that again. Try to make a trade for a player that's not been linked to them yet, a player that would make sense to them, but we're simply not hearing about it until the trade actually happens. And well, with that in mind here, what kind of player could that be for them, or what kind of team could they trade with that we're not hearing about and would actually make sense to their team too? As even now at 17-6, currently at second place in the Western Conference, they do have a few remaining holes left. One of which, and the biggest one being a 3-and-D wing, simply two-way depth on their team. That's what I'd point to, and probably what I'd point to if they're going to try to make a trade, what kind of player they go after, and what kind of archetype they pursue. I would point to a 3-and-D wing and or a two-way wing or two-way guard. That's probably what I'd look for here. So with that in mind here, we're going to talk about a few trades that, although are not being talked about and have not been brought up in headlines for trade rumors relating to their team, are some names and a few teams that they could potentially trade with that are not being talked about. So we're going to talk about that and try to break it all down here. And well, without further ado, diving into trade number one, I'd point to the Brooklyn Nets as a team in general. They made the Dorian Finney-Smith trade with them last season, have had a good trade rapport with them lately, and I could point to a few different trade targets on their team. But the one that makes the most sense in my opinion does happen to be Haywood Highsmith. A guy that's currently hurt and has yet to play this season, but with reports saying that he'll be reevaluated later this week, that he'll hopefully come back shortly after that point, and likely long before the trade deadline, at least 2 or 3 weeks at least hopefully before that point, I wouldn't be shocked to see them make a trade deadline move for a guy like Haywood Highsmith. A 3-and-D wing that's a 38% plus career 3-point shooter, is 6'6", is a good on-ball defender, good team defender in general, only 28, so he fit their timeline, would fit the Luka Doncic timeline quote-unquote, would fit their need for a two-way wing player, a 3-and-D wing player, whatever you want to call it. I think he'd be a good starting level player to address the need. Maybe not the only trade they make and not the only one that would perfectly address their need, but definitely a good starting point for it. Again, pointing to the Brooklyn Nets, a team they made a trade with, actually have kind of made multiple trades with, if you count moving up in the draft, I would point to their team and point to the relationship between them as a good starting point for them to make a trade that nobody's talking about at this current moment. Then for a second trade, I'd point to a guy that they have been lightly linked to, and would probably be linked to again if Giannis Antetokounmpo does in fact get traded, this player being Gary Trent Jr. And he happens to be a player that the Lakers were heavily linked to at one point, back in 2022 to late 2024, they were heavily linked to Gary Trent Jr. Not so much right now, and it might not make a ton of sense for them at this current moment, trying to trade for him when the Bucks are trying to compete, but if they would in fact trade Giannis and then enter a fire sale for their team, I guarantee Gary Trent Jr. would be on the trade block. And while he isn't a 3-and-D wing, I would call him a very good 3-point shooter, a guy that can be a decent defender when committed, and a player that would be an upgrade over a current player that's not in their rotation, that being Dalton Knecht, a player they could swap for Gary Trent Jr. and probably a guy that the Bucks would take if they would enter a rebuild, probably do a simple swap for Dalton Knecht for Gary Trent Jr. I think it would make sense, and again with them having prior interest in Gary Trent Jr., They reportedly did try to sign him during the 2024 offseason. Between that and then with him being an upgrade over Dalton Knecht, a guy again that I think they could probably swap for him via trade, pointing to his consistency compared to Dalton Knecht, pointing to the fact that despite not being a great defender, he can be better than Dalton Knecht, is an 8-year veteran, despite only being 26 going on 27. I think it would work for their team and would give them a slight upgrade coming off their bench, and a lot more offensive production for their bench unit too. Gary Trent currently averaging about 10 points per game, shooting 36.5% from the 3-point line, being a 39% career 3-point shooter. Definitely is a microwave kind of option and definitely can get hot in a hurry. Isn't the, again, best 3-and-D option, or maybe not the highest IQ option, can be a bit shot happy at times, but I'd point to it as a trade that it would make some form of sense and is a guy that they have had prior interest in, so I would point to it. Then for a third trade, I'd point to a team like the Toronto Raptors, a team they just beat last week on a game-winning shot, a team that's playing pretty well and although will not be entering a rebuild and therefore they won't be quote-unquote sellers at the trade deadline, they do have a few potential financial problems that if they don't address around the trade deadline, then they could likely lose some assets for nothing during free agency, one of them being Ochai Agbaji, a guy that currently is on the outside looking in of their current rotation. Not only that, but is under an expiring contract, likely will have to be paid a decent amount of money this summer. You know, with his value trending downward, it might help the price for him. Also, it'd help a team trade for him, as his trade value is currently lowered. But if they would retain him and try to play him a bit more, which I think they should be doing, then it would probably cost them a pretty penny to pay him this summer to retain him. So rather than trying to do that with them already having financial issues, paying for and trading for Brandon Ingram, paying guys like Emmanuel Quickley, having RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, so on and so forth, they don't really have room for him. So in my opinion, a team like the Lakers could come through and make a sneaky trade for him, adding a young 3-and-D wing, Ochai Agbaji being only 25 years old, coming off a great season of averaging 10.4 points per game, 3.8 rebounds per game, 1.5 assists per game, 1 steal per game, shooting 50% from the field and 40% from the 3-point line. It was a great year for him and I'm really shocked and confused to why the Raptors are not playing him that much. You know, this season has had his playing time cut in half from 27.2 minutes per game down to 14 minutes per game, and is having some dreadful numbers to show for it. You know, not getting in a rhythm and not being a full-time rotation player for them, averaging only 3.5 points per game, 2 rebounds per game, under 1 assist and 1 steal per game, shooting 39.3% from the field and 10% from the 3-point line. He clearly is not in a good rhythm, clearly is not a big part of their team, and probably is not even happy to be on their team at this point. I would not be shocked to see them trade him. And again, with his current production and therefore his trade value being lowered, whether that's purposely or not purposely by the Toronto Raptors, it probably wouldn't take much to get him. Maybe something like Gabe Vincent with a 2nd-round draft pick, or at the very most a future 1st-round draft pick swap. I wouldn't be shocked to see him go for this kind of price. So in my opinion, a great trade target for a team like the Lakers who need a 3-and-D wing. Even more than that, would love a 3-and-D wing that fits their timeline. Again, Ochai Agbaji only being 25, had shown some good production. If you put him in a consistent and a role where he can gain the rhythm in, I think he'd be a great fit and would add some much needed production to the rotation that doesn't have many two-way players, which he definitely can be and has already shown the ability to be. But then for a fourth and final trade that I would not be shocked to see the Lakers go after, I would point to a team like the Chicago Bulls, who although got off to a 5-0 start are now trending downward, and not only that, but with how cheap their ownership has been, only paying the luxury tax one time in team history. And no, that was not when Michael Jordan played for them, back when Derrick Rose played for them actually. I doubt they'd enter the luxury tax for a guy like Ayo Dosunmu, a player that's currently having a career year for them, but is under an expiring contract and likely will take a pretty penny to retain this summer, currently making $7.5 million this season, and I would be shocked if that doesn't double, let alone triple next season to what he likely will want and probably will be able to get. I'm not sure the cheap Bulls ownership group wants to pay him that, and would probably rather trade him to get some cheap contracts under team control. So maybe a guy like Dalton Knecht, or if they want to expand the trade and maybe give the Bulls a little bit more value here, including both Dalton Knecht and Gabe Vincent, maybe with a protected 1st-round draft pick, or a combination of 2 future 1st-round draft pick swaps and a 2nd-round draft pick, for a combination of Ayo Dosunmu and Jevon Carter with him. I would definitely love to see a trade like this. Not only do I think Ayo is extremely underrated with the season that he's having and with how consistent that he has been in his NBA career so far, whether you're pointing to the scoring ability, the defensive ability, even the playmaking and shooting ability here and there, this season shooting 47.5% from the 3-point line, damn near 50%, even playing point guard for their team last season, averaging 4.5 assists per game to only 1.5 turnovers per game. Then the defensive ability here and there, if you watch him play, then you know what I'm talking about. I think he's a very young, versatile player that could be a great fit for a team like the Lakers. And then for the cherry on top here, according to prior reports, the Lakers did have interest in trading for him around the trade deadline last season. And even apart from that, Bulls reporters were claiming that the Bulls were open to trading him and probably would trade him because they don't want to eventually pay him. I think it would make a ton of sense, would make a fit sense to their team, would make a trade sense in the fact that, again, they could get him with their assets and the Bulls might want to trade him rather than pay him this summer. I would point to it as a sneaky trade and a sneaky trade target that the Lakers could definitely pursue. And overall here, despite trade rumors not directly linking them to the Lakers team and not anytime this season yet, I wouldn't be shocked if the Lakers would go after them or some kind of trade target like this. Again, whether it be an Ayo Dosunmu, Ochai Agbaji, Gary Trent Jr., Haywood Highsmith, or pretty much anyone on the Brooklyn Nets, I think it would make sense to their team for one reason or another, whether it be the prior interest in them, whether it be the trade relationship with that team, the player fitting their needs, or whatever it might be. I think there's a lot to point to with trade targets that have not been linked to their team yet, or maybe that never will, but they eventually will make a trade for that player, despite it not being heard about. But those are only my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts here. What trade targets that we have not heard about might the Lakers have interest in and might even eventually make a trade for, despite us not hearing about them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. But I think that'll pretty much do it for this one. And if you enjoyed the video, then I would greatly appreciate it if you dropped a like, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and hit that notification bell to never miss out when I upload a video. But as always, thank you for watching, and have a great day or night.